All right, let me move on now to this mysterious individual, Melchizedek, a person about whom I would say the majority of Christians know nothing. You talk about Melchizedek, and most people say, well, I've seen that in the Bible, but I don't know anything about it. What is it? Well, there are only 4 verses in the whole Old Testament that deal with Melchizedek. But these 4 verses become the cornerstone for this whole set of theology, which is crucial. So let's start with the priestly order, chapter 7, verses 1 to 10. The writer of Hebrews is presenting Jesus as a priest, superior to Aaron. How do you do that? Well, to do this, Jesus is seen to be of the order of Melchizedek, a priestly order which is superior to the Aaronic order. Hebrews 7:1 is introduced with 4, because the writer is about to explain the order of Melchizedek mentioned in 6:20. So let's look at 6:20. Where Jesus has entered, talking about the Holy of Holies, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, 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 according to the order of Melchizedek, Melchizedek, Melchizedek. And I'm emphasizing those words because they're going to become important in a bit. For this Melchizedek, remember hook words? He's taking the word Melchizedek now from 6:20 and developing it in chapter 7. All right, it says forever in 6:20. Now chapter 7, verses 1 to 3 are one long, involved, complicated sentence. It's just one sentence. You can't see it in the English, but it's one sentence. The subject of the sentence is Melchizedek, verse 1. The verb of the sentence is way down in verse 3, abides. Melchizedek, and then at the end of verse 3, made like the Son of God, abides a priest perpetually. So you have the 2 thoughts, Melchizedek and forever. And that's what he's explaining, that Melchizedek abides as a priest forever. And he gives this description of Melchizedek in verses 1 to 3 and between. That's all appositional. It's descriptive. It's very, very interesting. You follow what I'm saying? The subject is Melchizedek. The verb is abides. This Melchizedek abides, and it looks back to 6:20. He abides a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. It's interesting to observe that the entire paragraph, verses 1 to 10, is based on just 3 verses. Genesis 14, 18 to 20. So let's step back to Genesis 14, 18 to 20, and just take a quick glimpse, and it will be just a glimpse at this passage. Abraham is returning from a victorious battle in which Lot, his nephew, had been captured and taken as prisoner. So let's start with verse 17. Verse 17, then after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, that is, Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, Abram, gave him, Melchizedek, a tenth of all. That's all it is. Verses 18 to 20, the only thing you have of Melchizedek in Genesis, and the only other reference is Psalm 110, verse 4. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Those are the only 4 verses on Melchizedek in the whole Old Testament. And he builds this whole theology amazingly from those 4 verses. All right, let's take a look at it. Verse 2 explains that Melchizedek's name means king of righteousness. What is king in Hebrew, students? What is king? Melech. What is righteousness? Sadiq. Yeah, Sadek or Sadiq. He is the king of righteousness. Melchizedek. That's where you get that, Melchizedek. It so happened that he ruled over Salem or Salem. Salem, of course, means what? That's right. Today, to this day, that's the word for peace in Arabic. Salem. Salem. One time I was talking to an Arab person, and I said, Shalom Aleichem. Oop, that's the wrong thing to say in Arab. Shalom Aleichem. That's Hebrew, of course, and they want Salem Aleichem. It's Shalom. It's Salem. It's peace. Therefore, he is both king of righteousness and king of peace. It's obvious the scriptures teach a close relationship between righteousness and peace. Close relationship. It's obvious from James 3:17, for instance. The wisdom that's from above is first pure, then peaceable, and other passages as well. The order is important. Notice what he says. Drop back, if you will, to chapter 7, verse 2. To whom also Abram apportioned the 10th part of all the spoils, was first of all, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then also King of Salem. Do you get the significance of the order, students? Profound implications. First, King of Righteousness, then King of Peace. The wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable. The implications are overwhelming. The point is, you don't have peace at any price. Righteousness is the basis for peace. Purity is the foundation for peace. We can't have peace at any cost. You've got to have some standards. During the 60s and early 70s, when everything was run amok in our universities, and they were these insurrectionists, they were literally destroying the universities. They were taking over, you don't see these pictures today, but they were taking over the president's offices, rifling files, smoking his cigars, overturning file cabinets, and just destroying the offices and so on. You don't see those pictures today. It was awful. It was mayhem. And one of their sayings was, you can see how socialistic it was. You can see it was totally out of the left wing. One of their sayings was, better red than dead. Better communist than dead. Well, that's peace at any price. We don't believe that. So it's first righteousness, first king of righteousness, Melchizedek, then king of peace. So students, please, it's not peace at any price. I go a long ways to maintain peace. As a pastor, if I find there's something wrong in the church, well, I get on that immediately. You don't want any disruptions. But you cannot give up doctrine. If it's something that's basic doctrine, you can't give that up. You just have to stick with it. It's not peace at any price. I think you get the point. Hebrews 7, verse 3 causes one to ask a question. Was Melchizedek a theophany? Verse 3, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, abides a priest perpetually. So the question is, was Melchizedek a theophany? What do I mean by theophany, students? Yeah, appearance of God. Theos, God, phano or phoneo, to appear. So it's an appearance of God. Your theology is not going to be changed by this. It won't. You can take either side. It won't change you. But I guarantee that people ask you, was Melchizedek a pre-incarnate revelation or appearance of Christ? Well, I don't think he was, but I would not die for this. There's several reasons. Number one, the Genesis account never gives any indication that Melchizedek was anything else than human. You just really think he's a man. Secondly, he is never called the angel of Jehovah. Thirdly, and this is quite important, normally theophanies reveal themselves as God. Even in Genesis 18, when Abraham entertained angels unawares that they were angels, by the time they left, Abraham knew that one of them was God and adored them, recognized him as God. Fourth, Hebrews 7:3 says he was made like the Son of God. How could he be made like the Messiah if he was the Messiah? Fifth, verse 11 refers to another heteron priest to arise, a different priest to arise. You notice that in verse 11. Stop down to verse 11. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek? Now, you can get around that one. That's not that strong. You could say it's another priest different from Leviticus. You could get around that. That's not that strong. It's kind of weak. So I should, number 5. Let me take a couple more points. In Hebrews 7, 1-3, 3 similarities are shown to exist between the Lord Jesus and Melchizedek. Their names are similar: righteousness, peace. For instance, Jeremiah 23, Jehovah our righteousness, or Yahweh our righteousness. Ephesians 2:14, he is our peace, talking about the Messiah, just like Melchizedek. Both are different from other priests. Melchizedek was different, so is Christ. And both abide forever. That's what he is saying. Well, how does Melchizedek abide forever? In type, or in picture, he continues because there's no genealogy of Melchizedek. No father, no mother, no record of his birth, no record of his death. He just appears almost like a phantom on the scene. He's just there and then gone. So in that sense, he looks like he abides forever in pictorial form. Let me take a couple more points. In verses 4-25, all the way to near the end of the chapter, a very logical argument is developed. The major premise: Melchizedek is greater than the Aaronic order. That's the major premise. The minor premise: Christ is of the order of Melchizedek. The conclusion: Christ is greater than the Aaronic priesthood. It's just, you can just see the logic very, very simply put. Well, 3 superiorities of Melchizedek are given in verses 48. First, Melchizedek received tithes from Abraham. Start with verse 4. Now observe how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave 1/10 of the choicest spoils. Good translation. He tithed, but he tithed the best. Didn't just give the bottom of the pile. He gave 1/10 of the top spoils. Very interesting. I might just say this in passing. You often hear people say, tithing was a part of the Mosaic system. We're not under the Mosaic system, therefore we should not tithe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to notice that tithing preceded the Mosaic system. You have tithing in Genesis 14, where Abraham paid a tithe to Melchizedek. You have tithing in Genesis 28, when Jacob said, if you bring me back to Bethel, to this place, I have nothing. All I've got in my hand is a staff. If you bring me back here, I'll give you a tithe of all that I possess, because everything he would possess would be profit. I'll give you a tithe of all the profit. So you have tithing before. I frankly feel that the measure of giving to God should at least be the tithe. Now, I want to put a caveat, a warning on that. According to 2 Corinthians 9, let every man give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or under pressure, for the Lord loves a cheerful giver. And the Lord would rather have you give 3% than 10% unwillingly. He'd rather have you give 3% willingly than 10% unwillingly. But I think as much as possible, you should start with a tithe. Now, I know I'm in school, I'm having a hard time. Poverty is no excuse for not tithing. You find in 2 Corinthians 8, the Macedonians gave out of their deep poverty. And Paul says, they begged me to take this offering. And you can tell Paul was reluctant to take such a large offering from so poor a people. So students, poverty is no excuse for not tithing, or not giving at least. So even while you're in seminary, students, give. And if you can, as much as possible, if you can do it with a willing heart, tithe. This is the one place where the Lord said, test me. You're not supposed to put the Lord to the test. Don't you dare do that, except in tithing. Just tithe. See if I want to put you to the test. I mean this. Try out God. Just try tithing and see if God will not take care of you. And I guarantee he will. He'll take care of you. Test me. I know that's under law. I know it's Malachi, but you have the same thing in 2 Corinthians. He is able to multiply your goods so that you may have more to give, not more to get rich, so that you may increase for more liberality. So so give while you're in seminary. It's tough. I know it's tough. I've been there. So, but give. I hate to say this. When I went to seminary, when he came into the seminary, no tuition. It was free. It was a lot easier to tithe then. But you guys, I know you guys are paying tuition, and we didn't have that. While I was in seminary, they started to charge $50 a semester tuition. I was on the cabinet, and I was chosen to be the spokesman to go in and talk to Dr. Walford about this departure from the faith. So I went in, and I was pointing out how the faculty and the administration should be models of faith and so on. And I was going through this whole thing, and finally Dr. Walford very graciously turned to me and said, whose faith are you talking about, yours or ours? I went down in flames, you know, because we all should be walking in faith is the point. But from then on, tuition just gone on. But originally, and gone up and up, originally it was free. Can you believe that? When the school originally began, no fees for food or anything. You just came. Isn't that something? It was incredible. We were talking about the similarities, yeah, we saw Melchizedek received tithes from Abraham. The second, I'm talking about the three superiorities. First, Melchizedek received tithes. Second, he blessed Abraham. And you notice verses 6 and 7, the greater always blesses the lesser. Take a look at verse 6. But the one whose genealogy is not traced from them collected a tenth from Abraham. That is not from the line of Levi. He collected a tenth, a tithe from Abraham, and blessed the one who had the promises. But without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. And you can see this, that Jacob blessed his sons, Abraham blessed Isaac, Isaac blessed Jacob, Jacob blessed his sons, as we said. You can see it in that regard. I'm reading, I have a Bible program where I read through the Bible every year, and I saw something just a couple of weeks ago I had never seen, that when Jacob came down into Egypt, and Isaac introduced Jacob to Pharaoh, Jacob blessed Pharaoh, meaning God looked on Jacob as being greater than Pharaoh. Isn't that interesting? The greater, without dispute, the greater blesses the lesser. I asked this in the quiz one time, true or false, the greater blesses the lesser, and the student put false. He came up to me afterwards, he said, I disagree with that. He said, let me give you $1. Now, who's being blessed? The lesser is blessing the greater. No, that's not what it's talking about. You know, he was joking. He was joking. He was a great guy. He was joking. But without doubt, the greater pronounces the blessing of the lesser. Melchizedek blessed Abraham, therefore Melchizedek is greater. Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, therefore Melchizedek is greater. Third, Melchizedek lives on, in the sense that there's no record of his death. The thought found in verse 8 has already been stated in 620, forever. Now, the well-known argument of Levi being in the tithe, being in the loins of Abraham when Abraham tithed to let me say that again. The well-known argument of Levi being in the loins of Abraham when Abraham tithed to Melchizedek seems to be a parallel to Paul in Romans 5:12. So if you will, take a look at verse 9. And so to speak, through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes. For he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Very, very interesting discussion. Remember when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek in Genesis 14? Wow. Wow. Raise the tuition. Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. Who was Abraham's son? Isaac. His son? Jacob. And then 12 sons. Reuben, Simeon, Levi is the third. So we have Levi down here as a third son. Number 1, 2, and 3, Levi. Levi is in the lines of Jacob, who's in the lines of Isaac, who's in the lines of Abraham. My goodness, Abraham had not even had Isaac as a son yet. Abraham had not had Isaac in Genesis 14. And yet Levi in Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. So this may explain Romans 5:12. In Adam, all sinned. So that if you go back far enough, all of us were in Adam. This is called the seminal, S-E-M-I-N-A-L, the seminal interpretation of Romans 5:12. We were in the seed of Adam when he sinned. If I preach this, I use an illustration of a box and 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 a box. The big box, of course, is Adam. And there you go down the various boxes, and finally we're the little box in the middle. So that every person was in Adam is the argument, so that when Adam sinned, we sinned. When I preach it, I use some kind of a humorous illustration of giving a gift to somebody with a box, a box, a box, a box, something like this, you know. You have to go through all the boxes to get to the person. Well, you have to go through all the line of Adam to get down to Toussaint. So likewise, you have this idea here. So this may illustrate Romans 5:12. All right, we'll move on. In his perpetuity, he's taking one aspect of it here, not just Abraham offering tithes and so on. He's emphasizing one point, and that is the perpetuity of this priesthood. Verse 11 makes sure the reader will recall the quotation of Psalm 110. Psalm 110, verse 1. He's already referred to it in chapter 5, verse 6. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. You must know Psalm 110. That's absolutely crucial. That's the one that refers to Christ being of the order of Melchizedek. Genesis 14, Psalm 110. Psalm 110, as we've said before, is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. So he wants to remind you that he's a priest forever after that order. That's what verse 11 is saying. If perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it, the people received the law. Just stick that back in your head for a minute. On the basis of the priesthood, the people received the law. They're tied together. If the perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be designated according to the order of Aaron? You get the logic? It's wonderful. He had already ordained the order of Aaron. Centuries later, he comes to Psalm 110, a psalm written by David. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. If perfection was meant to be attained through the order of Aaron, why ever promise another priesthood? The order of Aaron must be temporary because there's another priesthood forever according to the order of Melchizedek, meaning the order of Aaron was temporary. Do you follow the theology of it? It's very, very clear. If he had already ordained the Aaronic priesthood, centuries later, the promise of another priesthood, indicating the Aaronic priesthood was not forever. The theological deduction, well, let's move on. The prophecy proves that God never intended the Aaronic order to be the permanent one. The theological deduction of verse 12 is even more sweeping. The law of Moses and the Aaronic order are inextricably bound together. If the Aaronic order is temporary, so must be the law of Moses. I don't know if you remember, no, I know you don't. Way back in the early days of television, there was a Catholic bishop, I think he was, who gave a Sunday night lecture on nationwide TV. It was very, very, very good. Sheehan was his name, I believe. Father Sheehan. And he would use the blackboard, and then he'd go off somewhere else, and an angel would erase his blackboard. He came back, it would be clear. I need an angel to erase my blackboard. I'm teasing. Theologians basically divide the law into three parts. There's first the ceremonial law. Give me an illustration of ceremonial law. What would be something of that? What part of the law? I mean, how would you see it in the law? Pardon? The washings, but more than that. Sacrifices, the priesthood, all these things were ceremonial law, even the tabernacle. Then you have what is known as the civil law. The civil law governed Israel. If you stole something, you had to pay it back with 20% penalty. If you dug a well or a hole or a pit, and your neighbor's cow wandered over and fell into that pit and died, you have to pay for it. You didn't put a fence around it. If you put a fence around it, then you did not have to pay for it. All these were laws that governed how Israel ran itself. We don't govern ourselves by the civil law of Israel. We govern our laws by the laws of Texas and the United States. We are not under the civil law. The third is the moral law, especially seen in the Ten Commandments. Now, here is where the rubber is meeting the road in theological discussions today. Everybody agrees we're not under the ceremonial law. I don't know of anybody that says we are under the laws of sacrifices, under the laws of the priest, the laws of the priestly days, and so on. But there are some who believe we're under the civil law and the moral law. These people are called theonomic reconstructionists. Theos means what, students? God. Namas, law. God's law reconstructing society. Theonomic reconstructionists. They believe that we ought to we as Christians ought to get such a say in government that we take over the government and then put in the laws of the Old Testament to govern the United States today. So if somebody's guilty of prostitution, kill them. If they are homosexuals, you stone them or put them to death, capital punishment. We would take the laws of Moses and apply them to today. It's interesting, one headquarters for it is found in Tyler, Texas, just 100 miles east of here. And you find that in the Reform movement, it's just a fraction, but it's a very vociferous, loud movement that has been causing no little stir in the Reform movement with theonomic reconstructionists. By the way, these people are also post-millennialists. We're going to get better and better and better. We're going to take over more and more governments, and one day we'll bring the kingdom to this world. They say we're getting better and better all the time. Well, we're not under the civil law. We realize this as you study the scriptures. We're going to see this in a moment. The majority in the Reform movement believe we are still under the moral law as seen in the Ten Commandments. And so they put us under the Ten Commandments. Have you ever been in a Reformed church? And I grew up, my early years were in the Reformed church. Good people, don't get me wrong, born again. But if you're in a Reformed church on Sunday, they'll say, Lord, bless us on this Sabbath day. Is that the Sabbath day? No, that's Saturday. That's past. They'll say, Lord, bless this. And what they do is they transfer the laws of the Sabbath to Sunday. In the old Reformed churches, you could not buy a Sunday paper without sinning. What they would do is buy the Sunday paper. If somebody came, they'd hide it under the sofa pillows. You could not do, children could not do anything that was playful. You couldn't play ball, you couldn't swim. They had all these rules that they imposed on Sunday. Because if you're under the Ten Commandments, that fourth commandment is very important. Did you ever notice? There's more space given to the fourth commandment than any of the other 10 commandments. Just look at it, Exodus 20. More space given to that one. Why? Because that's the seal or the sign of the Abrahamic covenant. By the way, that fact is not lost on Seventh-day Adventists. They'll say, if you really love the Lord, you'll keep the Sabbath because there's more space given to that than the other commandments. We don't believe we're under any part of the law. We're not under this. We're not under any of it. Now, because we do not, are you listening? Because we do not believe we're under any of it, people think we believe in licentiousness. And we don't. Because every one of the 10 commandments is repeated in the New Testament except the law of the Sabbath. So we have 9 of the 10 repeated in the New Testament. Well, if you say that, why don't you say we're under the moral law of Moses? Because it's another system. You have the law of Moses as one system, and we have New Testament covenant as another system. Let me illustrate. Some of you may remember I grew up in Minnesota. That's all I'm going to say. I grew up in Minnesota. In Minnesota, would you believe it's against the law to steal? In Minnesota, it's against the law to murder. Again, in Minnesota, it's against the law to commit perjury, to lie in court under oath. We moved to Texas. It's against the law to steal. It's against the law to murder. You never know it, but it's against the law to murder in Texas. Against the law to commit perjury. Same laws. But they are 2 entirely different systems. The laws of Minnesota, the laws of Texas are 2 systems. And you see a huge difference. Under the law of the Old Testament, there was no enablement. That's the big one. In the commandments of the New Testament, I don't like to say law, the commandments of the New Testament, there's enablement. Romans 8, 3 and 4. What the law could not do in that it was weak. God having, in the flesh, God having sent his own son, the likeness of a flesh of sin and for sin, condemned sin under the law, that the righteous requirements of the law might be fulfilled by those who walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. So the point is, you have commandments here, and God gives you the strength to do it. In the Old Testament, you had the law, no enablement. All you could do was flee to grace. And it was not part of the law system. It just, over here, you have law, and when I diagram this, I usually say it this way. The law was for a period of time, from Mount Sinai down to the cross. Grace is forever. In this period of time, grace goes from the beginning to the end. During this period of time, if a person wanted to be justified, he fled to grace. If a person wanted to live a righteous life, he fled to grace. And some of these people live godly lives. But it's only as they fled to grace, it was not as part of the law system. And that's what you have in this. And that's why you're saying, if you take one part of the law and change it, you've got to change the whole thing. And that's the point of verse 12. Look at it again. Take a look at it. Verse 12. For when the priesthood is changed, of necessity, there takes place a change of law also. You can't divide it like that. The law is a system. It's a package. And you take it in whole or you discard it. And that's what he is saying here. If there's a change of the priesthood, you've got to change the whole law. They received the priesthood on the basis of the law. Or the law was received, I should say, on the basis of the priesthood. So it's a package deal. Now, I'm sure there'll be comments or questions on this. Very controversial, but you need to know this. This is going to come up in your life and ministry.
What do you mean exactly by no empowerment for righteousness? And was their righteousness completely self-righteousness?
No, that's my point. They had a flee to grace for that. That's why David said in Psalm 34, blessed is the man to whom the Lord has not imputed iniquity, whose sins are forgiven. And Paul uses that in Romans 4 to show that the law was not the method of salvation. It was simply by faith. It was by faith.
When you speak of empowerment for us, what exactly do you mean? Empowerment for what? For righteousness? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well then, in that sense of righteousness, you say that some under the law were still righteous. What kind of righteousness was that? Oh,
the only righteousness they could get is under grace. There was nothing under law.
It wasn't an actual righteousness? I mean, in the sense of, for us, the righteousness, the empowerment, you mean in a sanctifying sense,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, what about for those under the law?
They had a flee to grace the same way.
But did they have righteousness in the sanctifying sense?
By fleeing to grace, not under law. If you see, not under law. That's the whole point. That if you take Romans 7, it's very strong. The law is holy and just and good. Nothing wrong with the law. And that's his point. There's nothing wrong with the law. The problem is us, and that's what he goes on to say. And he has a cycle of three cycles in Romans chapter 7 towards the end. That I find that a law, that is a principle in my life, that when I want to do good, evil is present with me. What's he talking about? Living the righteous life under the law. When I want to do good, I don't do it. And he's just simply saying there's no enablement, nothing wrong with the law. And that's why you have to leave the whole law system, and that's his argument in Galatians, same story. There's just no enablement. That's why you have the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. You're looking at two different walks of life. Go ahead.
So they wouldn't have the fruit of the Spirit in that sense?
They didn't have the fruit of the Spirit in the sense that we do today, but they had righteous lives. They lived godly lives because they fled to grace, because they walked by faith, not on the basis of the law, but by faith. They were justified by faith. They were justified the same way we are. That's Paul's argument. They're justified the same way we are.
I guess it's the sanctification part that gives me a problem. Because for us, we don't see sanctification as something,
but you have,
as a work of the Holy Spirit, which seems like it almost has to be by nature of the fall.
Sure, but that's right. But there's a basic principle. The method of justification always determines the method of sanctification. You can't separate them. And that's Paul's argument in Galatians 3. How are you saved? Are you going to continue in faith, or are you going to go back to law? So the method of justification always determines the method of sanctification.
So there's continuity.
There's continuity. Right. So in the Old Testament, they were justified by faith, they were sanctified by faith. Why then the law? That's why Paul asked, and finally, well, if that's true, if there's not justification, there's not sanctification, why the law? And he explains the law was kept to keep Israel as a minor, to keep Israel as a distinct people under these laws and regulations until the Messiah should come. When the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, and so on. So the law was sent kind of to be protected over Israel, to keep it as a distinct nation. And that's the point of it. Good questions, Guy. Good questions. Appreciate that. Well, we got time for a couple more minutes. Then we'll take a break. All right. As we said, the theological deduction of verse 12 is even more sweeping. The law of Moses and the Aaronic order are inextricably bound together. If the Aaronic order is temporary, so must be the law of Moses. Now, students, pretend you're a Jew. And you've heard that the law is olam, it's forever. And you hear this. You'd be shook. You'd be really shook. How can that law be something that's temporary? How can it be changed? And you can see why this would be a tremendous struggle for these readers. Tremendous. The trouble is we read it as Gentiles in the church. We don't stop to think of what it was for a Jew to become Christian. It's incredible. Right, verses 13 and 17 apply the theology to Christ. The next paragraph, verses 13 and 17 give two evidences that the priesthood and therefore the law was changed. First, the Messiah was to be a priest, but his tribe was different from the Levitical tribe. Take a look at verses 13 and 14. We read in verse 13, for the one concerning whom these things are spoken belongs to another tribe. The Melchizedek priesthood belongs to another tribe, from which no one is officiated in the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, the tribe with reference to which Moses spoke nothing concerning priests. And so that shows, of course, that there is a whole different tribe. That it was not from the tribe of the tribe of Aaron. It was from the tribe of Judah, which is amazing. Second, the priesthood was constituted on the basis of physical requirements. But the order of Melchizedek required a priest that functioned on the basis of indestructible life, verses 15 and 17. And this is clearer still if another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become such not on the basis of physical requirement, but according to the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, thou art a priest forever. And that's the emphasis there, not just the order of Melchizedek. Thou art a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So the physical requirement would be genealogy. You had to be of the genealogy of Aaron, but that had death. This is the order of Melchizedek, no death, physical requirement. The physical requirement was Aaron, line. But when you go down that genealogy, you had to be of a certain line. If you go down that genealogy, death. But not Melchizedek. And that's his argument. This is on the basis of an indestructible life. He lives forever, is the point. All right, we are in chapter, I better get back here. We're in chapter 7 of the book of Hebrews. We're talking about the perpetuity of the Aaronic priesthood, and that the order of Aaron is temporary, and so is the law of Moses. This is where we left off. Now in verses 18 to 19, if you'll notice, it says, "For on the one hand, there's a setting aside of a former commandment because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. And on the other hand, there's the bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God." Now you'll notice the notes. In verses 18 to 19, the contrast is made between the two systems of Aaron and Melchizedek. The one is ineffective, and the other makes it possible for believers to draw near to God. The contrast is seen in the excellent translation, "on the one hand, on the other hand." How do you do that in Greek, students? Men, deh. On the one hand, on the other hand. Because of the better hope, we have faith to draw near to God. Now, verses 20 to 22. The superiority of the divine oath of Psalm 110, verse 4, is the theme of Hebrews verses 7, 20 to 22. The Aaronic order had no oath, interestingly. Therefore, the priesthood of the Messiah is better. The oath makes Jesus the guarantee of a better covenant. So let's take a look at verse 20. "And inasmuch as it is not without an oath," that is, thou art a priest, the Lord has sworn, he said, thou art a priest forever. For they indeed became priests without an oath, but he with an oath through the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. Thou art a priest forever. So much the more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. We're going to see what makes the covenant better. We're going to see what that is in just a moment. The permanence of Jesus Christ as the believer's priest is the theme of Hebrews verses 23 to 24. The oath is fortified by an eternal priest. Some question revolves about Pontelis of verse 25. Does it mean completely or forever? So let's take a look at it. Verse 23. "And the former priests, on the one hand, existed in greater numbers, because they were prevented by death from continuing. But he, on the other hand, because he abides forever, holds his priesthood permanently. Hence also, he's able to save forever or completely, to the uttermost, as the King James says. He is able to save those who draw near to God through him." And either one is a legitimate translation, forever or totally. But since the context is talking about the eternality of the Messiah, of the priesthood, I take it that probably it should be taken forever. That's the only argument I can really give. The context is emphasizing forever, so that's why I would agree with the translation that we have. He's able to save forever. In summary, it may be noted, oh no, I don't want to, one more, but the previous paragraph. For a consideration of Christ's intercessory work, one may want to consult Exodus 28. We have the priest with the breastplate, the 12 tribes inscribed on it with the 12 stones, or with their shoulders with the 6 tribes in each shoulder. Matthew 14:23, and Luke 22:31 to 32, which I love, where the Lord says to Simon, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, and the you there is plural. You can't tell from the English. Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, plural, the disciples. Then he goes on to say, I prayed for you that your faith fail not, and the you there is singular. Fantastic. You know, the Lord intercedes for us as individuals. And I prayed for you, Peter. So the Lord's intercessory work, you may want to take a look at that. In summary, it may be noted the office of the Lord Jesus has 4 superiorities in chapter 7. Indestructible life, better hope, grounded on an oath. His ministry is based on an eternal priesthood. Fantastic priesthood. In his person, verses 26 to 28, Here Christ is seen as being superior to the Aaronic priesthood because he's perfect forever. Priests were to offer sacrifices for themselves. We're going to see that much more clearly in a later chapter. But Christ offered himself for the sins of men. Furthermore, the sacrifice was once for all. Verses 26 to 28. It was fitting that we should have such a high priest, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. Remember, he passed through the heavens. Here you have it again. He's exalted above the heavens, who does not need daily, like those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins, and then for the sins of the people. And we're going to see that very clearly in the Day of Atonement especially. Because this he did once for all when he offered up himself. Once for all. Oh, happy condition. Jesus has bled and there is remission. You don't sing that hymn anymore. It's a wonderful hymn. Once for all is what that's saying. For the law appoints men as high priests who are weak. But the word of the oath which came after the law appoints a son made perfect forever. The sacrifice is once for all. Fantastic. All right, now we move on to the next subject, which is the place of the ministry. And this is a very interesting subject. It's not difficult to ascertain the primary concept in verse 1. Now, the main point, you can't miss it. It really means the capital point, the climactic point. And what has been said is this: we have such a high priest who has taken a seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. He's passed through the heavens. He's at the right hand of the Father. The words, the main point, have the idea of climactic or crowning point. This crowning point is the place where Christ ministers. The place is not only at the right hand of the Father's throne, but also in the true tabernacle. Verse 2. He says, a minister in the sanctuary and in the genuine, alethanos, in the genuine tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, not man. So the place is at the right hand of the Father, yes, but it's also the true tabernacle, genuine. In anticipation of Hebrews 9, verses 12 to 14, and he's talking about verse 3, take a look at verse 3. For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. Hence, it is necessary that this high priest also have something to offer. I mean, the high priest offered sacrifices. What is this high priest going to offer? And as the notes say, this is anticipating what is going to be stated in chapter 9, verses 12 to 14. It's anticipating them. Once again, verse 4 emphasizes the place where the Lord Jesus ministers. It's not on earth, where priests already function. Now let's take a look at verse 4. Now, if it were on earth, he would not be a priest at all. There's already the Aaronic priesthood, since there are those who offer the gifts according to the law. Now, verse 5, this is very important. Who serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. He is saying the earthly tabernacle is not the real tabernacle. Christ is serving in the true tabernacle. That's what he's just said. In the genuine tabernacle. What do you mean? There's a heavenly tabernacle and there's an earthly tabernacle. And Christ is serving in the heavenly tabernacle. You see, some of you are looking at me quizzically. Let's move on. I say, don't you read your Bible? Look at verse 5. I'm teasing him. I'm teasing. I'm just kidding. Lighten up. Verse 5. Who serve a copy and shadow of the heavenly things, just as Moses was warned by God when he is about to erect the tabernacle. For see, he says, that you make all things according to the pattern which is shown you on the mountain. Now, what is he saying? When Moses went up on Mount Sinai, he saw the true tabernacle, the genuine tabernacle. And the tabernacle on earth is only a reflection, a copy of the true tabernacle that Moses saw on Mount Sinai. I don't know if you've ever tried to construct the tabernacle in your own mind, at least. I've tried this in my mind. I remember doing this when I was in seminary. And I tried to figure out how the boards fit in the corners. And I could never figure out how are those corner joints put together. Well, for Moses, no problem. I mean, he saw it. He saw exactly how it was constructed. And when you see models of the tabernacle, you notice some of them are flat-roofed. Remember that? And some of them have a pitch. Well, how was it constructed? Well, no problem. Moses saw it. He saw the true tabernacle, and the earthly tabernacle is only a reflection, a copy of it. I'm not talking about Platonic. It's much more than that. This is real also, but it's not the genuine one. So the priests are serving here in the copy, the picture. Christ is serving in the genuine tabernacle, which God built. And he's quoting here, by the way, from Exodus 25:40. Exodus 25:40 says, build it according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. Very, very good. The earthly tent is merely a copy of the genuine one which Moses saw on Mount Sinai. Isn't that interesting? It's very interesting. So Moses knew exactly how to build it. He saw it, how the joints were made and the poles put through the loops and all. He saw all that. Well, he has a better place of ministry, but he also has a better covenant. Not only is Christ superior to Aaron because he occupies a better position, a better priest, but also because his ministry is based on a better covenant. Why is the new covenant better? It is better because it has been enacted on better promises. Better promises. In the extended quotation from Jeremiah 31, in verses 8 to 12, 3 better promises are given. So let's start with verse 7, if I may. He says in verse 7, he's explaining why it's a better covenant. For if that first covenant had been faultless, and by the way, the problem is not the covenant. The problem is the people. That's what he's getting at. If the first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion sought for a second. For finding fault with them. You see, there's the fault. The people are the fault. The problem is not the covenant. Finding fault with them, that's what he's saying. He says, beholding, and so on. Now, Jeremiah 31, students, is one of the best passages I know for Jewish evangelism. If you want to talk to a Jew about Christ, you may want to start with Jeremiah 31. Because Jeremiah 31 says, I'm going to have a new covenant, not like the covenant that I made with Moses, which covenant you broke, and so on. And it's very interesting. Every Jew thinks the covenant, the Mosaic law, is forever. Olam. They think it's forever. They just assume that. But it's obvious from their own scriptures, Jeremiah 31 is not forever. If the Mosaic law was forever, why promise another covenant, specifically stated to be different from the law of Moses, not like the covenant which I made with them at Horeb or at Mount Sinai? It's a different covenant. And you could do that graciously and lovingly and point that out, and then you could just easily go on to say, well, that God's method of justification has always been by faith, and move on to how the covenant is also based on faith, etc. But Jeremiah 31 is a good passage to use with Jews. I remember using it one time with a Jewish guide in Israel, and you could tell this poor guy had been witnessed to hundreds of times. When I think it shook him a little bit because he had not heard this. You know, if the Mosaic law is forever, why did Jeremiah 31 predict a new covenant? And his answer was, oh, the Mosaic law can always be applied to any situation, so it's always new. But it specifically says, not like the law that I made on Mount Horeb. It's a totally different one. So it's a better covenant. That's why I say verse 7 is an excellent verse to use in Jewish evangelism. Same type of argument as in Hebrews 7:11, where if the Aaronic priest was forever, why promise another priesthood? The trouble is the Jews today are using priests, you know, and so that would not have as strong an application as just the law of Moses as a whole being usurped by a better covenant. If the Mosaic law had been indeed intended as a permanent covenant, why did God promise another covenant? It should be noted that the pronoun them in verse 8 does not refer to the provisions of the Mosaic law, but to the people. The extended quotation is from Jeremiah 31. I expect you to know Jeremiah 31. The new covenant is promised in a number of passages, but the most extended passage dealing with the new covenant is Jeremiah 31. You should have Jeremiah 31 in your minds. That is and by the way, Jeremiah 31 is the longest quotation of the Old Testament in the book of Hebrews. You can tell it's an extended quotation of it. If I may move on now, the key word in Hebrews 8:13 is new. I'll talk about the better promises in a bit. Oh yeah, it is all right there. I missed this. In the extended quotation, 2 paragraphs up, in the extended quotation from Jeremiah, 3 better promises are given. I'll put my laws into their minds, verse 10. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I'll put my laws into their minds, and I will write them upon their hearts, and I'll be their God. The second, all shall know me, and they shall not teach everyone his fellow citizen and everyone his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest of them. And thirdly, and this is the climactic one, I'll remember their sins no more, for I will be merciful to their iniquities, and I'll remember their sins no more. We're going to see in a later chapter that on the Day of Atonement, there was a reminder of sins. Every year, a reminder of sins. Every year, a reminder of sins. With the new covenant, their sins and their iniquities I'll remember no more. That's the climactic one. So the key word in 8:13 is new. The adjective is kainos, which emphasizes a new kind of covenant. What's the other word for new in Greek, students? Neophyte, da-da-da, neos, remember? N-E-O-S, neos. The difference between neos and kainos is this. Neos basically means recent in time, recent in time. Kainos may be recent in time, but it also indicates different in quality. If I would say, well, just for instance, I had a Pontiac Transport, and I didn't have a bit of trouble with it. But I was getting high mileage. I was getting near 130,000 miles on it, so I thought, I better trade this in before I start getting big problems. And so I traded it in. They gave me a lousy trade-in price, but I traded it in. And I got a Pontiac Montana, which is the same thing, just another name. So I got a Naos car, and it's not Kainos, the same kind. I said, I want the same kind of car. That car didn't give me any trouble. 8,000 miles on it, and the steering went out on it. I couldn't believe it. But I didn't have a thing wrong with the other one, so I wanted another car like it. So it's kind of, if I would have bought, let's say, if I would have bought a Dodge, it'd be kainos, a new kind of car. Well, the word that he has here is kainos, a whole new kind of covenant. It's different in kind, is what he is saying. The last clause of verse 13 implies that the service in the tabernacle is still going on. He says, he has made the first obsolete, but whatever is becoming obsolete is growing old and ready to disappear. It hasn't disappeared, it's destined to disappear, but it's still under operation, which implies that it was still being operated.